Hi everyone, this is Happyfingers and welcome to another workflow demonstration. For this tutorial, we will work on what is called an outtake. I define an outtake as an image that does not make it to the final cut but still has the potential to be a good take, given time and a refreshed perspective. Now, if you have some free time on your hands, I humbly suggest for you to revisit your photo archive and check the outtakes of your previous shoots. I guarantee you there will be at least one image that would stop you on your tracks and make you go, how could I possibly miss this shot? Now, we tend to be so fixated, so close with the good takes that oftentimes, or almost every time, we lose perspective for the other takes. Affording yourself the luxury of distance from your portraits allows you to refresh your mind and see perfections and imperfections in portraits that you did not pay attention to before. With a refreshed mind, you can see the potential in images that you might have previously set aside. This is one such portrait. Today we're working on a portrait of the lovely Jessica Yang, whom I had the privilege of shooting for my current series, Coffee in the City. Quick specs, we're looking at an image that was shot at 320th of a second at f2.8 with the lowest possible ISO, for my camera at least, of 100. This was shot with an 85mm prime mounted on my Canon EOS M. It's my point-and-shoot mirrorless that I use for virtually all of my shoots. A quick look would tell me that the portrait looks okay, but I think it could use some minor enhancements and balancing. So, before I go and apply any isolated adjustments, I always go global. By global, I mean I make adjustments that affect the entire image as opposed to local or spot adjustments that affect one area or spot. We do global adjustments by heading over to the basic panel, which is at this area. And I usually start off, just like in my previous videos, by dragging down the highlights, increasing the shadows, pulling back on the whites, just so I could address the overexposed values, and increasing the blacks. Now, to pronounce the lines of her hair, the contours of her eyebrows, eyelashes, and the edges of her body in general, I will try to bump up the clarity by just a few values. That's a pretty safe value for me, just so I could get those accents in place. We're almost there. We're getting the image, we're getting the balance that we want. However, I think the colors could use a little more punch. So I will achieve the look that I want by heading over to the tone curve and adjusting the red, green, and blue channels like this. So very minor adjustments. It's all about balance and control. You will notice that the colors of the image start to change as soon as you hit those curves. So it's all about balance and control. I can teach the theory in another video, but what I do is make 2 anchor points per curve and adjust them like this until I achieve the grade that I want. Almost there. Okay, let me just drag down the shadows of the greens. There we go. All right. And then as a final touch on the tone curve, I will add another anchor point on the highlights and another on the shadows, just so I could play with it a little further. Okay, there we go. And lift the blacks like this, just so I can get a bit of that matte look that I like very much. Now, you would see that the skin tones of Jessica are a little oversaturated, so I would address that by dragging the vibrance just a few values downward and heading over to the luminance panel in the HSL area and increase the luminance of the orange slider, just so I can balance out her skin tones and maybe a bit of the yellow as well. Final touches. I will use the brush tool and set it to dodge and brush against the areas that I think could use a bit of highlighting. So I will touch on the hair and maybe this portion of her jeans. And lastly, if I feel that there are still some areas that need a bit of darkening, I would set the brush tool to burn and apply the necessary adjustments on the areas that need to be darkened. Okay. As one final touch, I would head over to the detail panel and increase the sharpening just so I get more detail. Maybe adjust the noise, bring it down a few notches, and adjust the color slider on the detail to 50 or above, just so I could address the artifacts that come out whenever I increase the highlights on the tone curve. As one final accent, I will play with the grain just so I could get a bit of texture. Yeah. And let's see how that looks up close. Okay. All right, so we're looking at an image that looks a lot more balanced, has a lot more contrast, a lot more color and depth than the previous image that we started with. I'm also seeing some grain and texture that I personally prefer. You can adjust the depth and the amount of grain just by playing with these sliders over here. And there you have it. So just to quickly view the image before and after. All right, so just to play around with the temperature a bit more, we can use the temperature slider on the basic panel and drag it a little bit to the left just so I can get a bit of a cool tone. Since she's wearing pink, I prefer something that's a little cool just so that it could jive with the overall mood that Jessica is conveying in this image. All right, so there you have it. On this image, we pulled back on the temperature by a few notches just so we get a cool feel. We decreased the highlights, pushed the shadows, dragged down the whites, and increased the blacks. We also increased the clarity by 14 values and decreased the vibrance to adjust a bit of the oversaturation that was apparent on her skin tones. We also played with the tone curve. We lifted the shadows and played with the red, green, and blue channels. Lastly, we adjust the oversaturation on her skin tones further by increasing the luminance on the orange and yellow sliders respectively. Finally, we increased the sharpness, made slight adjustments on noise reduction, and brought the color noise adjustment further up to address the artifacts that would show up if I adjust the tones using the tone curve. To add a bit of texture, I played with the grain, pushing the amount to a little less than 50, with a relatively small size of 18, 19, or 20, whichever. It really depends on what size of grain you want, and an average roughness value of 37. And that's it. I'll be posting this final image on the Happyfingers photography page. If you would like to learn more about how I process and shoot my portraits, feel free to send me a message on facebook.com/happyfingersphotography, and I can tell you more about one-by-one workshops by Happyfingers, which will happen on a limited basis next month, October. I'll be doing these workshops on the weekends of October on a very limited basis. So far, I think I have 3 or 4 slots remaining. And if you would like to learn more, just send me a message at the page. You can also send me a message if you have any questions on workflow, processing, editing, gear, working with models, and anything under the sun as it pertains to photography, or anything, or really anything for that matter. Just send me a message on the Ask FM page. Once again, this is Happyfingers. Thank you so much for watching. Go out and keep shooting.